I woke up that morning expecting the sharp bite of winter air, the scent of fresh pine, and the simple joy of starting a roaring fire in my living room. Instead, I found an empty spot where my neatly stacked firewood had stood the night before. At first, I thought I was losing it that I misjudged how much I had left. But no, just yesterday, I'd spent an hour arranging it perfectly, ensuring it was dry and ready for the season. Now it was gone. Not a single log remained. Someone had taken it all, right down to the last splinter. Annoyance gave way to suspicion as I stormed back inside and pulled up the footage from my security camera. If some crafty squirrel had suddenly developed a taste for firewood, I wanted proof. But what I saw on the screen was far worse. There she was, Linda Harper, the self-proclaimed ruler of the HOA, the woman who'd made it her life's work to micromanage our neighborhood. She wasn't even trying to be subtle. With her signature smug grin, she marched up to my firewood pile in broad daylight, barking orders at some poor neighbor who'd wandered into her orbit. With a dramatic sweep of her arm, she directed two hired movers clearly roped in her latest power, Tripto, load my wood into a pickup truck. She didn't hesitate, didn't glance around with guilt or caution. She just took it. I felt a mix of shock and rage settle in my chest. She hadn't even bothered to cover her tracks, no note, no explanation, no warning. She decided, all on her own, that my firewood now belonged to the HOA. And the worst part? I already knew her excuse. She'd claim it was a violation that my firewood wasn't pretty enough for her lofty standards, or maybe that it was a fire hazard, even though half the neighborhood had identical setups. None of that mattered. Linda made the rules, and Linda decided when to bend them. Fueled by fury, I marched down the street to her house. Naturally, she'd turned it into the HOA's unofficial headquarters, complete with an over-the-top American flag display and a mailbox so spotless it looked like it got a daily polish. I barely knocked before she flung the door open, already annoyed, as if my showing up was a personal insult. Before I could speak, she flashed her fake, sugary smile. "Oh, Mike, good morning. What a surprise. What can I do for you?" "You can start by explaining why you stole my firewood," I said, crossing my arms. She had the nerve to scoff. "Stole, Mike? That's a bit harsh, don't you think? I just repurposed it for the good of the community." I narrowed my eyes. "Repurposed it, Linda? That was my firewood. I paid for it. I stacked it, and now it's gone." Linda tilted her head like she was talking to a toddler. "Mike, you know the HOA has standards. Your firewood was an eyesore, stacked in a way that, frankly, clashed with the neighborhood's aesthetic harmony. I was doing you a favor by taking it." I gritted my teeth. "Linda, it was in my backyard. Nobody could see it." She waved a hand dismissively. "That's not the point. The HOA's annual bonfire is coming up, and we needed extra firewood. Your pile was the closest and most convenient." I let out a bitter laugh. "So you're saying you took my firewood because it was convenient for you?" Linda sighed, clearly bored. "Oh, Mike, it's just firewood. I don't know why you're making such a big deal. You can always get more." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. Linda had a knack for making everyone feel like they were the problem, like their perfectly valid anger was overblown. But I wasn't falling for it. "Fine," I said, stepping back. "If that's how you want to play it, Linda, go ahead. Enjoy my firewood. But you've made a huge mistake." She gave a patronizing chuckle. "Oh, Mike, always so dramatic. It's just firewood." I turned and walked away, my mind already spinning with a plan so brilliantly sneaky I almost laughed out loud. Linda had been lording over this neighborhood like her personal fiefdom for years, strong-arming people into obeying her ridiculous rules. But this time, she'd picked the wrong target. She'd taken from Minute out of need, but out of arrogance, thinking there'd be no consequences. I was about to prove her wrong. I headed straight to my garage, an idea taking shape that was equal parts devious and poetic. Linda thought she could grab whatever she wanted without pushback. Well, I'd show her just how costly that mistake could be. My hands moved fast as I rummaged through my supplies, pulling out exactly what I needed. A few hollowed-out logs, a bag of fire ant-stiny critters with a sting that could make anyone cry, and just enough patience to wait for the perfect moment. Linda had started a war, and I had the perfect weapon to fight back. Sitting in my garage, I stared at the hollow logs I'd carefully prepped, a deep sense of satisfaction brewing. If Linda wanted to steal my firewood without asking, I'd make sure she got exactly what she deserved. There was something beautifully fitting about it taken from me under the guise of community improvement, but now she was about to sabotage herself. I reached for the small container beside me, lifting the lid just enough to check my tiny army. The fire ants inside swarmed furiously, their bodies buzzing with energy, unaware they were about to star in my revenge. I'd spent hours perfecting the plan. The logs looked identical to the ones Linda had stolen, same size, same cut, same natural flaws. But these were special. Each had been hollowed out with small entry points carved just deep enough for the ants to nest inside. I tested a few to ensure the ants wouldn't escape until the logs hit the fire's heat. Once they started burning, the ants would panic, swarming in every direction. And that's when the real show would begin. I picture it like a scene from a comedy. Linda, smug as ever, tossing my generous donation into the flames in front of the whole neighborhood, oblivious to what was coming. I stacked the logs neatly by my garage, making it look like I'd simply replaced my stolen firewood. Linda was predictable. I knew the second she saw fresh logs, she'd help herself again. It wasn't about the firewood for her. It was about control, proving she could take whatever she wanted. She'd done it once, and she'd do it again. When she did, I'd be ready. The next morning, I didn't have to wait long. As I sipped my coffee, I glanced out the window and saw her at the edge of my yard, hands on hips, her trademark scowl fixed on my new pile. Without a pause, she strutted over, waving her hired movers to load the wood into her truck, directing them like she was leading a parade. I could hear her self-important voice from inside, yammering about how this was essential for the HOA event. I leaned back, smiling as they drove off. Everything was in place. Now I just had to wait. That evening, the neighborhood gathered for the HOA's annual bonfire. Linda, as always, stood front and center, soaking up the spotlight. She held a microphone, her voice booming through the crowd as she droned on about uniting the community and sacrificing her time for everyone's enjoyment. She lapped up the attention, clueless that her moment of glory was about to become her downfall. The fire pit glowed warmly as people milled around, sipping hot cocoa and chatting. Linda, true to form, insisted on the honor of tossing in the first log. She made a big show of it, picking up one of my hollowed logs, hoisting it overhead like it was a sacred offering, and hurling it into the flames with a flourish. The crowd clapped. The wood caught fast, and for a fleeting moment, everything seemed fine. Then the ants woke up. It started small, just a few confused critters, dazed by the heat, crawling out of the log in search of safety. But within seconds, it was a full-on swarm. Dozens became hundreds, then thousands, all fleeing the fire in survival mode. The fire pit erupted into chaos as ants spilled out in every direction, landing on shoes, scurrying up legs, and biting anything in their path. The screams began quietly, but quickly turned into a chorus as the infestation hit full force. Linda, standing closest to the fire, was ground zero. She let out a blood-curdling shriek, flailing wildly as ants crawled up her arms, down her back, and into her hair. She stumbled backward, crashing into the refreshment table, sending a giant bowl of cocoa splashing all over her. The sticky mess only made things worse as the ants doubled down, biting with fury. The panic spread like wildfire. People leapt from their chairs, knocking over tables, tripping over each other to escape the onslaught. Someone's plate of morays went flying, the marshmallows sticking to Linda's cocoa-soaked clothes, turning her into a human glue trap for the frenzied insects. She thrashed and spun, screaming about health code violations and chemical warfare, while the neighborhood watched in stunned disbelief. The HOA vice president, an older woman named Margaret, was the first to snap out of it. "Somebody help her!" she yelled, but no one dared get close. Linda, still flailing, tripped over a toppled chair and face-planted into the moray station. When she sat up, her face was smeared with melted marshmallow, her hair a sticky tangle of sugar and fire ants. The scene was so absurd, so perfectly chaotic, I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. The ants kept coming, and Linda, realizing no help was coming, made a desperate choice. She ran-sprinted past the crowd, through the park, and dove headfirst into the pond at the edge of the event space. With an ungraceful splash, she hit the water, emerging seconds later, gasping and flopping like a soaked cat. Her perfectly styled hair now clung to her face like seaweed. The neighborhood stood frozen, staring in silence. Then, slowly, the first chuckle broke through. It spread like wildfire until everyone was doubled over, laughing so hard some had tears in their eyes. Even Margaret, clutching her clipboard, was wheezing with laughter. Linda, humiliated, crawled out of the pond, her pristine image in tatters. She didn't bother with a speech or try to salvage her dignity. Soaked, covered in marshmallow, her pride shredded, she stomped to her car, slammed the door, and peeled out into the night, leaving behind a bonfire that would live in infamy. I stood at the back of the crowd, sipping my cocoa, savoring every second. Linda had finally faced the consequences of her entitlement, and the best part? She'd brought it on herself. As I turned to leave, a few neighbors caught my eye, flashing knowing smirks. They didn't say a word, but their looks said enough. They knew I'd had a hand in this, and they weren't about to snitch. The fallout from the bonfire fiasco spread through the neighborhood like gossip at a barbecue. By the next morning, the street was alive with whispers. Texts pinged, and a few neighbors were still chuckling about Linda running into the pond, dripping with marshmallow and fire ants. It was the kind of story that'd be retold for years, growing wilder with each version. Some said Linda's scream had set off every car alarm for miles. Others swore she'd swallowed a marshmallow whole and nearly choked. I was happy to let the legend grow. Linda, though, was nowhere to be seen. Her house, usually a hub of self-important bustle, was eerily quiet. No early morning HOA notices taped to doors, no snippy emails about lawn ornaments. It was like the queen had fled her castle. I figured she was holed up, plotting damage control, trying to spin herself as the victim. That was Linda's style. She never admitted defeat, no matter how obvious her loss. By afternoon, her first attempt at a comeback arrived. An email with the subject line, "Emergency HOA meeting mandatory attendance." The message was pure Linda dramatic, full of buzzwords like gross negligence, safety breaches, and threats to community values. It was clear she wanted to paint herself as the target of a vicious plot, blaming the bonfire chaos on sabotage. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The meeting was held at the community center, and by the time I got there, the place was packed, chairs filled, people lining the walls, all buzzing with excitement. A few neighbors shot me sly grins as I walked in, their eyes twinkling with amusement. Linda sat up front, looking rougher than usual. Gone was her polished veneer. Her hair was still a bit frazzled from its pond adventure, and her face was tight with barely contained frustration. She was trying to hold on to power, but she'd lost something crucial the night before, her grip on the neighborhood. She cleared her throat, straining for her usual air of superiority. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," she began, her voice too sharp, too forced. "We have a serious matter to address. Last night's bonfire was a disaster, a disgrace to our community, and it was caused by a deliberate act of vandalism." A few chuckles broke out, but Linda plowed on. "Someone," she said, her eyes sweeping the room and lingering on me, "intentionally tampered with the firewood, placing insect-infested logs in the pile. This caused chaos, injury, and damage to the HOA's reputation. It's an attack on our way of life, and I demand the culprit be held accountable." She paused for effect, expecting outrage. Instead, the room stayed awkwardly quiet. A couple of people swapped glances, and then someone in the back snorted. Linda's jaw tightened. Margaret, the vice president, spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "Linda, before we start pointing fingers, maybe we should talk about the real issue, how that firewood ended up there in the first place." Linda blinked, thrown off. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone defensive. Margaret leaned forward, hands clasped. Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you take that firewood from Mike's property without his permission? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Linda's face twitched, but she forced a laugh. Oh, please. It was for the community's benefit. His firewood didn't meet aesthetic standards. Margaret raised an eyebrow. You mean the aesthetic standards that aren't actually in the HOA rules? Linda froze, her argument unraveling. Another voice piped up old Mr. Larson, one of the neighborhood's longest residents. Linda, you stole that man's firewood, threw in the bonfire in front of everyone, and now you're mad it blew up in your face. Sounds like you got what was coming. Laughter erupted, louder this time. Linda's face turned crimson, her composure crumbling. She'd spent years intimidating people, twisting rules to suit herself, acting untouchable. But now the spell was broken. People weren't scared of her anymore. They were openly laughing, questioning her, and she knew it. A move for a vote, Margaret said, cutting through the noise. A vote to remove Linda as HOA president. The room went quiet for a beat, then exploded with voices. People nodded, whispered, agreed. Linda's face twisted in panic. You can't be serious, she sputtered, jumping to her feet. I've given years to this community. I made sacrifices. You stole firewood, tanked the bonfire, and nearly caused a stampede, someone shouted. You fined me for my birdhouse, another added. You wrote me up for my Christmas lights, a woman chimed in. You banned my kid's lemonade stand, a teenager yelled. That was the breaking point. The room erupted in boos, people laughing, shaking their heads, demanding the vote. Margaret, barely hiding her grin, stood up, all in favor of removing Linda as president. Hands shot up more than half, more than enough. Linda's mouth opened and closed like she couldn't breathe. She scanned the crowd, desperate to claw back control. You're making a mistake, she cried. You need me. This community needs me. But no one was listening. The vote was done. It was over. Linda let out a strangled sound, part fury, part disbelief, and stormed out of the community center. The doors slammed behind her, and the room burst into cheers. That night, I sat on my porch, a fresh stack of legally bought firewood beside me. The air was crisp, the sky clear, perfect for a small, private bonfire. As I watched the flames dance, a few neighbors stopped by, laughing, sharing a beer, basking in the day's victory. Linda's reign was finished, the HOA was free, and for the first time in ages, the neighborhood felt like a real community. I raised my mug of cocoa, smiling to myself. Here's to justice, I muttered, tossing another log into the fire. And for once I could enjoy it in peace.